In the vast, sprawling city of Calgary, nestled against the foothills of the Canadian Rockies, life for Marshall Iwasa seemed on the surface to be moving along a familiar track. It was the autumn of 2019. At 26 years old, Marshall was a student at the Southern Alberta Institute of Technology, or SITE, a place where bright minds went to build their futures. He was known to his family as a quiet, thoughtful young man, someone deeply immersed in the digital world. His passion was not just playing video games, but creating them. He had dedicated countless hours, nearly 800 of them, to developing a game of his very own, a project that spoke to his creativity and technical skill. It was a solitary pursuit, but one that filled his days and nights. To his family, Marshall was the reliable son, the tech-savvy helper. But beneath this calm exterior, a different story was unfolding, one that Marshall had kept entirely to himself. He had been on a break from his college program, but what his family didn't know was that the break had become permanent. He hadn't attended classes for some time, and crucially, he was not enrolled for the upcoming semester. This secret, held close to his chest, painted a picture of a young man perhaps feeling lost or under pressure, navigating a path that diverged from the one his loved ones believed he was on. It was a private burden he carried as he went about his daily routines, a silent undercurrent to an otherwise ordinary existence. The days leading up to his disappearance were, by all accounts, unremarkable. He was in Calgary, going through the motions of his life. He helped with chores, maintained his space, and interacted with those around him in his typically reserved manner. There were no grand pronouncements, no dramatic changes in his behavior that would have set off alarm bells. It was just Marshall, living his life. But hindsight, as it so often does in these stories, casts a long and ominous shadow over these simple moments. Every normal action, every quiet conversation, is now scrutinized, searched for a clue, for some sign of the baffling journey that was about to begin. The ordinary became extraordinary only after he was gone. November 17, 2019 started like any other Sunday. It was a day for family, for small tasks, for preparing for the week ahead. No one could have predicted it would be the last day Marshall Iwasa would spend in the familiar comfort of his own world. The decisions he would make in the coming hours would set in motion a chain of events so strange, so perplexing, that they continue to mystify investigators and haunt his family to this day. The quiet life of the Calgary student was about to intersect with a dark and impenetrable mystery, a story that would soon travel far from the city streets and into the rugged, unforgiving wilderness of the British Columbia Mountains. The storm was gathering and no one saw it coming. On that fateful Sunday, November 17th, Marshall made a decision that at the time seemed perfectly reasonable. After finishing up some tasks in Calgary, he got into his dark blue GMC Sierra pickup truck and started driving. His destination was Lethbridge, a smaller city about 2 hours south where his mother lived. The purpose of the trip was simple and selfless. His mom was having some computer trouble, and Marshall, the family's resident tech expert, was going to fix it. It was a familiar role for him, the kind of helpful gesture that defined him in the eyes of his family. The drive itself was uneventful, a straight shot down the highway, under the vast Alberta sky. He arrived in Lethbridge and spent the evening with his mother, troubleshooting her computer as planned. The visit was pleasant, normal. They talked. He worked on the machine and the hours slipped by. Around 11 p.m., Marshall announced he was ready to head back to Calgary, but he had one more stop to make first. He told his mother he needed to swing by his storage unit, located in an industrial park on the outskirts of Lethbridge. The plan was to grab something from the unit and then make the 2-hour journey home. He said his goodbyes, leaving his mother with the impression that he would be back in his own bed in Calgary before the night was over. It was the last time she would ever see her son. Marshall drove to the storage facility as intended, but when he arrived, he hit a snag. The facility was closed for the night. The gate was locked, the keypad inactive. Undeterred, he began a strange and persistent vigil. Security records from the facility's keypad would later show a log of his repeated attempts to get inside. Throughout the cold, dark hours of the early morning, Marshall tried his code again and again. It was a pattern of behavior that raised immediate questions. What was in that storage unit that was so important it couldn't wait until morning? Why spend the entire night waiting in a desolate industrial park instead of going back to his mother's house or simply heading home to Calgary? This peculiar episode at the locked gate is the first truly baffling chapter in Marshall's disappearance. It marks a sharp deviation from the logical and the expected. A young man alone in his truck, trying repeatedly to access a simple storage unit through the dead of night. He could have slept in his truck anywhere, but he chose to stay there, fixated on that gate. This wasn't just impatience, it felt like something more urgent, more desperate. The cold logic of a simple errand had evaporated into the chilly November air, replaced by an obsessive quest to get inside that locked compound. The mystery of Marshall Iwasa had begun, not in the mountains, but right there, in the quiet solitude of a Lethbridge parking lot. As the sun began to rise on the morning of Monday, November 18th, Marshall Iwasa's long, cold wait finally came to an end. At precisely 6 a.m., the storage facility's gate system activated for the day, and his access code, which had failed him all night, now worked. The gate slid open, and he drove his GMC Sierra into the maze of identical steel doors. This moment, captured by the facility's digital logs, represents the last confirmed, independent record of Marshall's activity. He was there, he was alone, and he was finally about to retrieve whatever it was that had kept him tethered to this spot for more than 6 hours. The electronic beep of the keypad was, in essence, the last time the world could definitively place him. He navigated his truck to his unit, and for the next 2.5 hours he remained inside the facility. What happened during that time is a complete blank. Did he pack? Did he unpack? Did he meet someone? The family later stated that he had told them he needed to retrieve a specific computer part from the unit, something he intended to ship. Yet, when his family later gained access to the storage space to search for clues, they found nothing amiss. The unit appeared untouched, organized, with no obvious signs that anything had been taken or even moved. The reason for his desperate all-night vigil seemed to have vanished, leaving only more questions in its wake. The digital logbook provides the final entry in the timeline. At 8:24 a.m., Marshall's truck was recorded leaving the storage facility. He drove out of the gate and back onto the streets of Lethbridge, presumably with the items he had spent all night waiting for. From this moment forward, Marshall Iwasa effectively becomes a ghost. His cell phone, which had been a constant companion, went silent. His bank cards were never used again. His digital footprint, the trail of data that follows most of us through our daily lives, simply stopped. It was as if, after leaving that storage facility, he and his truck had driven off the edge of the earth. This 2.5-hour window inside the storage facility is a crucial, tantalizing piece of the puzzle. It was the destination of his obsessive overnight wait, the place where he spent his last known hours. Whatever he did in there, whatever he took with him, may hold the key to understanding where he went next. But with no witnesses and no surveillance footage of the unit itself, the contents of that time remain locked away, as secure as the steel door he had worked so hard to get behind. The man who drove out of that facility at 8:24 a.m. was, for all intents and purposes, a different person from the one who had driven in, a person on a new, unknown and terrifying trajectory. For 6 agonizing days, the world of Marshall Iwasa's family was filled with a growing, suffocating silence. After he left his mother's house in Lethbridge, they expected to hear from him. A text message confirming he was home safe in Calgary, a phone call, anything. But the calls and texts they sent went unanswered. The silence stretched from hours into days. Worry turned to panic. On November 22nd, his family officially reported him as a missing person to the Lethbridge Police Service. They retraced his steps, spoke to his friends, and desperately tried to piece together where he could have gone. But there were no clues, no leads, just an unnerving void where Marshall should have been. Then, on Saturday, November 23rd, the first piece of the puzzle emerged, and it was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. Far from the flat plains of Alberta, Deep within the rugged coastal mountains of British Columbia, a group of hikers was exploring a remote backcountry area near Pemberton. They were on the Felix Creek Trail, following a rough and isolated logging road, the kind of place you only find if you're looking for solitude. It was there, at the very end of the road, that they stumbled upon a shocking sight: the charred, skeletal remains of a pickup truck. It was a dark blue GMC Sierra, completely burned from the inside out. The scene was deeply unsettling. The truck was a hollowed-out shell. Its paint bubbled and peeled, its windows shattered from the intense heat. The hikers immediately sensed that this was not an accident. The location was too remote, the destruction too total. It felt, as one of them would later describe it, like a crime scene. A powerful feeling of dread hung in the air. This wasn't just an abandoned vehicle, it was a deliberate and violent act of destruction. They knew they had to report it. After taking note of the location, they made their way back out of the wilderness to find cell service and alert the authorities, their minds racing with what they had just seen. The discovery of the truck blew the case wide open, but it also plunged it into deeper, darker territory. Pemberton, British Columbia, is a staggering 14-hour drive from Lethbridge, Alberta. It was a journey across provincial lines, over mountain passes, and into a region where Marshall had no known friends, family, or connections. The question was no longer just, where is Marshall? It was now, why was his truck here, in this condition? The burned-out vehicle was a grim beacon in the wilderness, a testament to a journey that made no sense, and a finale that suggested immense violence. The silence had been broken, but the sound it made was one of fire and mystery. When investigators from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police finally reached the remote location at the end of the Felix Creek logging road, they were confronted with a scene that was as bizarre as it was disturbing. The truck itself was the centerpiece of the grim tableau, a testament to an inferno so hot it had warped metal, but it was the items scattered around the vehicle that told a truly bewildering story. Marshall's personal belongings had been strewn about the area, almost as if someone had methodically emptied the truck before setting it ablaze. It was not the chaotic mess of an accident, but something that felt more deliberate, more staged. Among the items found were things you would expect on a trip: clothing, toiletry bags. But there were also items that hinted at a frantic effort to erase an identity. Investigators recovered 3 different cell phones, all of them smashed. Marshall's laptop, a tool essential to his life as a student and game developer, had also been found, completely destroyed. His identification was there too, including his driver's license and, curiously, 2 passports. Why would someone on a supposed trip back to Calgary have 2 passports with them? And why would they, or someone else, go to such lengths to destroy the electronics, the very devices that could have tracked his movements or revealed his communications? The scene suggested a strange, ritualistic destruction. A trail of partially burnt clothes led away from the truck down a path toward a nearby creek, as if someone had shed their belongings while walking away from the fire. The steering column of the truck had been physically removed, a tactic that seasoned criminals sometimes used to destroy fingerprints or DNA evidence left on the wheel. Yet, for all this apparent effort to conceal evidence, other key items like his IDs and passports were left behind in plain sight. It was a confounding mix of careful concealment and careless abandonment, a contradiction that made it impossible to form a clear picture of what had happened. Perhaps one of the most significant missing items was Marshall's hiking backpack. For a young man found in the rugged backcountry of British Columbia, the absence of a proper hiking pack was conspicuous. If he had intended to venture into the wilderness, it would have been an essential piece of gear. Its absence suggested that either he never planned to hike or that he took it with him, packed with supplies for a journey on foot. The clues at the scene were a chaotic jumble of contradictions. Was this the work of a man trying to disappear, or the work of someone trying to cover up a crime? The burned truck and its scattered contents offered no easy answers, only deeper and more troubling questions. As the investigation into Marshall Iwasa's disappearance deepened, an already strange case was about to take an even more surreal turn. While police processed the evidence from the Pemberton burn site, another family was beginning their own nightmare. Just a few days after Marshall's truck was found, a man named Daniel Rioch also went missing under bizarre circumstances. Initially, the two cases seemed entirely separate, tragic coincidences happening in the same general region, but a startling discovery would soon weave their stories together in a way that no one could have anticipated, creating a complex and tangled web of mystery. The connection came to light when investigators began showing photos of the items recovered from the scene of Marshall's burned-out truck to other parties. When Daniel Rioch's family saw the images, they immediately recognized several of the objects. A few work-related items, things that had no logical reason to be with Marshall, were positively identified as belonging to Daniel. Suddenly, the two cases were inextricably linked. How did personal belongings of a man who would disappear days later end up at the scene of Marshall Iwasa's disappearance, hundreds of kilometers away and in another province? The question hung in the air, adding a new layer of complexity to the puzzle. Later, more information would surface that seemed to strengthen this improbable connection. A witness reportedly came forward, claiming to have seen both Marshall Iwasa and Daniel Rioch together. The sighting was said to have taken place at a bar in Squamish, a town in British Columbia situated between Vancouver and Pemberton. According to the witness, Marshall's distinctive dark blue GMC truck was parked outside the establishment at the time. This potential sighting, if accurate, would be a bombshell. It would place the two men together just before their disappearances and suggest that Marshall's inexplicable journey to BC was not a solo trip after all, but one that involved another person. Daniel Rioch's own disappearance added to the strangeness. He was last seen on January 7, 2020, exhibiting paranoid behavior before his own car was found abandoned. The overlap was too significant to ignore. Were they traveling together? Did they meet by chance? Or was their connection something more sinister, a shared involvement in an event that led to both of their disappearances? The presence of Rioch's belongings at the Iwasa scene transformed the case from a single missing person investigation into a potential double mystery, suggesting that the truth of what happened to Marshall might only be found by understanding what happened to Daniel Rioch as well. From the very beginning, the investigation into Marshall Iwasa's disappearance was hampered by a series of critical setbacks and evidentiary problems. The first major blow came from the very place his journey began, the storage facility in Lethbridge. That facility held the key to his last known hours. Surveillance cameras were in place, and the footage they captured could have shown who he was with, what he was carrying, or the condition of his truck as he left. It was without a doubt the single most important piece of evidence, but by the time police requested the tapes, they were gone. The system recorded over itself on a loop, and the crucial window of time had been permanently erased before anyone thought to preserve it. The second and perhaps more troubling issue was the state of the evidence at the burn site in Pemberton. The hikers who discovered the truck had done the right thing by reporting it, but the remote location meant there was a significant delay between their discovery and the arrival of the RCMP. In that critical time gap, something disturbing appears to have happened. The scene that the police documented seemed to have been altered from what the hikers originally saw. Items had been moved around, electronics were further broken, and some belongings appeared to have had water or ice poured on them, possibly in a crude attempt to degrade any forensic evidence. This apparent tampering is one of the most perplexing aspects of the entire case. The logging road was incredibly remote. The odds of a random person stumbling upon the scene in that short time frame and then deciding to methodically disturb the evidence are astronomically low. This suggests that whoever was responsible for the fire may have returned to the scene, or that someone with a vested interest in obscuring the truth was present. Despite the clear evidence of arson and the deliberate destruction of personal effects, authorities were cautious, and the case has never been officially classified as a criminal investigation, a point of contention for the family who believes foul play is the only explanation. These evidentiary black holes, the lost video footage and the compromised crime scene, created insurmountable obstacles for investigators. Without the storage facility video, they could not verify Marshall's state of mind or confirm if he was alone. Without a pristine scene in Pemberton, the forensic clues were muddled and unreliable. The investigation hit a wall, not for a lack of effort, but for a lack of usable facts. It was as if the perpetrator, whether it was Marshall himself or someone else, had expertly erased the most critical parts of the story, leaving police with a collection of strange facts that led nowhere. The path to the truth was being systematically obscured at every turn. Of all the riddles that make up the Marshall Iwasa case, his final journey remains the most profound. Why British Columbia? It's a question that echoes in the minds of his family, friends, and the investigators who have worked on his case. Marshall was an Alberta boy, born and raised. His life, his studies, his social circle, it was all rooted in Calgary and Lethbridge. There is no evidence to suggest he had any contacts in British Columbia. No friends to visit, no family to see, no job interviews to attend. His presence in the mountains near Pemberton was a complete geographical anomaly, a radical departure from the known map of his life. The journey itself is a testament to a determined drive. From Lethbridge, Alberta to Pemberton, British Columbia, is a trip of approximately 1,000 kilometers, or about 14 hours of continuous driving. It's a grueling trek that winds through the heart of the Rocky Mountains, crossing provincial borders and ascending steep mountain passes. This wasn't a casual joyride. It was a significant undertaking. Someone, presumably Marshall, drove his truck on this long and lonely road with a clear destination in mind. But that destination, the end of a remote logging road, was not a place of arrival, but a place of destruction. The journey makes no sense without a purpose, and no purpose has ever been found. Some have tried to rationalize the trip. The items found in his truck, such as a toiletry bag and extra clothes, could suggest a planned expedition. Perhaps he was trying to get away, to start a new life in the West, but this theory clashes with the known facts. His family noted that Marshall was exceptionally organized and tidy, and these packed items were not typically kept in his truck. It felt less like a well-planned escape and more like a hasty departure. Furthermore, if he was planning to disappear and start over, why drive to such an isolated spot, only to destroy his vehicle and all his identification? The actions are counterintuitive to a simple desire to run away. The trip to BC stands as the central, inexplicable act of the entire mystery. It transforms the narrative from a local disappearance into an epic cross-country enigma. Did he drive there willingly, under his own power? Or was he forced to make the journey by someone else? Was he fleeing something in Alberta? Or was he lured to his fate in British Columbia? Every possible theory hinges on understanding the motive for this drive. Without it, all the other clues, the storage unit, the burned truck, the destroyed electronics, are just disparate pieces of a puzzle with a missing center. The road to Pemberton was Marshall's final journey, and the reason he took it may have perished with him in the silent, imposing mountains. Today, more than 5 years after Marshall Iwasa vanished, his case remains an open wound for his family and a haunting enigma for the public. The passage of time has offered no clarity, only a hardening of the mystery. The core questions that arose in the first few weeks of the investigation are the same ones that linger today, unanswered and deeply unsettling. Despite extensive searches by ground crews, air support, and canine units in the rugged terrain around Pemberton, not a single physical trace of Marshall has ever been found. He walked out of a storage facility in Lethbridge and, in the eyes of the world, simply ceased to exist. The first and most fundamental question is, what did Marshall need from his storage unit so urgently that he would wait outside all night? His family's belief that he was retrieving a computer part is contradicted by the state of the unit, which appeared untouched. Was he getting something else? Something he didn't want his family to know about? Or was he meeting someone there in the pre-dawn hours? The 2.5 hours he spent inside the facility is a black box of time, and what happened within its walls is likely the inciting incident for everything that followed. Without knowing what he did or what he took, the very beginning of his final journey is shrouded in speculation. The next set of questions revolves around the journey itself and its fiery conclusion. Why did he drive 14 hours to a remote corner of British Columbia where he knew no one? Was he alone? The connection to Daniel Rioch suggests he may not have been, but that thread only creates more questions than answers. And what happened at the end of that logging road? The scene of the fire raises a chilling dichotomy. Was this a suicide? A desperate act by a troubled young man to erase himself? Or was it a homicide? A carefully staged crime scene designed to look like a disappearance? The destroyed electronics and removed steering column point toward a cover-up, but the IDs left behind defy that logic. Ultimately, the case of Marshall Iwasa is a story about the void. The void in communication after he left the storage unit. The void of evidence where surveillance footage should have been. And the vast, empty void in the mountains where a young man should be. What happened to Marshall after he retrieved his belongings? Where did he go after the fire consumed his truck? Did he succumb to the elements in the unforgiving wilderness? Or did he fall victim to a far more human danger? These questions hang heavy in the air, a constant and painful reminder that somewhere out there, the truth about the Pemberton incident is waiting to be found. But until then, we are left only to wonder what really happened to Marshall Iwasa.